Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perrello. We have a special guest on our show this time, a LaSalle graduate, and happy to say Vic Carreno is perhaps one of the most sought-after editors when it comes to television and film. We're going to get into his career and talk about this new project. I happened to see the trailer for his new project, which we'll get into in a moment. But first of all, Vic, thanks so much for being with us and joining us here on the Philly Factor.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
We mentioned at the outset here that you are a LaSalle graduate. You graduated in 2013, if my memory serves me correct.
10 years earlier, 2003.
2003. See, I'm trying to make you younger than you actually are, right?
Thank you.
And you were a communications major here at LaSalle.
Correct.
And how does one, in the Cliff Note version of the story, because I think for the students that may see this or potential students that may watch the program, how does one go from being a communication graduate, communication student / graduate, and then segue that into a career as a film editor?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so at LaSalle, I wasn't sure exactly what my path was going to be. I just knew that I wanted to work in production. I love film. I love TV. I didn't know what route within the industry it would take me. And I kind of came into editing after graduation. I got a job, or I had an internship as a senior at a production company in Philadelphia called Banyan Productions. They did a lot of reality TV shows for TLC. And at that time, I was interning on the production side, which I was very interested in, and hadn't really considered the post-production side at all. But after graduation, looking for a job, the only jobs that were open at Banyan at the time was for an assistant editor. And I had done some editing at LaSalle, as part of the curriculum, and I always enjoyed it. But I didn't, in school, I didn't really think that was what I wanted to do. But I took the job because it was a way in, and just really fell in love with the whole post-production process and the storytelling aspect of the control that you have as a storyteller in the editing process.
For people like me, when I go to the movies or I watch television, I always sit there, and perhaps frustrates my family at times, and I sit through the credits just because I feel that it's so important to pay tribute and honor to those people who have given their blood, sweat, and tears in many cases to putting the project together, whether it's the director, whether it's the animation artist, whether it's the editor, the music contributors. So I like to sit there, and sometimes the credits can go as long as 12 to 15 minutes after the movie is over. And, sometimes the credits that you're sitting through and you're reading the names and the jobs, some of them make sense, or they make logical sense as to what the director does. But then, there are some credits that you sit there and say, gee, I wonder what that person does. Where I'm going with this is, when you think of the term editor, it probably conjures up in many people's minds, a variety of definitions. So can you describe for us what exactly is the job of an editor? And I know that's a very broad question because it probably differs from, job to job, but what is the role of an editor on a project?
Sure, absolutely. Well, there's kind of two parts to it. There's the technical side, where you are tasked with, actually working with the footage, ingesting the footage, and working with the footage that was shot and piecing it together to make the story. But then there's the creative side, which is the storytelling aspect of it. And an editor's job is really to, bring the story to life. So you always have to be true to what the story is, but you're servicing the vision of the director. It's elevating what the director's vision for the story is just taking their vision and hopefully making it better.
In some cases, I think you would agree with this, only because you're an editor. But in some cases, the work of an editor can make or maybe even break a television show or a movie, because the editor's view of what he or she thinks the project should head in that direction differs that from the direction that the director might think that the project goes in. So would you agree that, and the director has this big picture idea of what the project is supposed to be, but when it comes down to the, I guess, nuts and bolts of this, the editor really could make or break a television show or a movie?
Absolutely. Yes. Well, hopefully if you have a good relationship with a director, you guys are on the same page with what the vision of the story is. But absolutely, I mean, an editor, that's where you run into issues when an editor's sensibilities might not align with that of the director. And hopefully that's identified before the final film story is put out. But when it's not, or a director can be sort of convinced otherwise, that's when it ultimately, the editor does have that power to influence what the final product looks like.
Mm-hmm. Is the editor involved in the project from the very beginning, or are you called in after the fact? The director comes in, and back in the day, I would think that the old way they made movies or television, they would come in with a box of reels or videotapes or whatever, and just throw it on your desk, Vic, and say, okay, here's all the footage. Now it's your job to put it together. I guess in the digital world that we live today, do they just send you files and say, okay, here's all the stuff, put it together?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as when the editor is brought onto the project, that varies. Sometimes, a lot of times in my experience, I work with a lot of great filmmaking teams in the Philadelphia area. And a lot of times when, the production company is starting a project, or, a project is being presented to them, they'll already have an editor in mind who that they know they want to work with, because they just match either that specific project to that editor's talent. Maybe that editor isn't specifically suited for that film, so they'll have another editor in mind. But sometimes the editor isn't chosen until much deeper into the project. It really varies from project to project. Like a lot of commercial work that I've worked on, that's not really thought up until much later in the process. They kind of hire a production company first, and then the editor is kind of brought on, much later. So yeah, it kind of varies from project to project.
Where I'm going with this is because I happened to see the trailer today for Hell or High Seas, and the trailer is brilliant. I mean, aesthetically, I was just so captivated and caught in the story just by this 2-minute trailer, so much so that it entices me to want to see the entire movie. And we'll get into the movie in a minute. And I guess that's the role of an editor, and that's the result of a great editor like yourself, that you're able to capture the essence of what this project is all about. So, I mean, when you're going in and you're editing a film, let's say, like Hell or High Seas, are you just brought in to work on the movie and then work on the trailer, or oftentimes is the trailer done or edited by somebody totally different than from the person working on the movie?
Yeah, well, it depends on the project. A lot of sort of bigger budget things, films, the trailer is created completely independent of the film. Like the editor has nothing to do with that. Some of the smaller budget documentary films that I've worked on, a lot of them I've cut because they're a smaller budget and because I'm very invested in the project. I know the story because I cut the film, and a lot of times I'll have an idea for the trailer that I'll present to the production company and say, hey, why don't we kind of structure it this way, or lean into these certain aspects of the film that I know resonated with me, and if we cut them in an exciting trailer, hopefully that'll catch people's attention and want to watch it. So um, with the production company that I've done a few films for in Philadelphia called Fresh Fly, I think this is my third or fourth film with them. I've cut the trailer to at least two or three of those because of the reasons that I stated. I just know the material, and I just have an idea, and they they give me the space to let me craft the trailer the way I see fit. And then of course they'll have some feedback, some ways to make it better, things that they think are important to include. But it's a very collaborative process.
We're talking with Vic Carreno, who is a LaSalle graduate who is now working professionally as a film editor. His latest project is Hell or High Seas, and this is a remarkable film. Just based on what I saw with the trailer, you've done a wonderful job, as I said, in drawing in the viewer. It tells a compelling story, Vic. And what is so remarkable is that, again, here's a classic case of the principals in this movie presenting you with all the information and then you piecing it all together. And what is equally remarkable is that the three principals in this movie, and we'll get into what the movie is about, had really no filmmaking experience whatsoever, but yet they've captured these wonderful images and this wonderful story. Not a bad job for these guys who were really on this remarkable journey, but with very little film experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a gift of a project to come upon. Yeah, the team, which is two veterans and a writer friend of theirs, they embarked on this journey. Taylor is a U.S. Navy veteran. He's the star of the film. He has had a struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder since coming back from deployment, and he was hitting rock bottom. And so he decided to use his love of the water and sailing to take this unbelievable, almost impossible journey, sailing from Pensacola, Florida, to the bottom of Cape Horn, which is at the bottom of South America, in this ragged old sailboat that he fixed up himself. And he did it twofold. One was to sort of a form of decompression and sort of readjustment back into civilian life, doing something that he truly loved. And also he wanted to document it and take that part of the journey seriously, because he wanted to present to other veterans that he knew that were struggling, that have a difficult time talking about hitting such low points as far as their mental health struggles go with PTSD. So they had actually shot a good portion of their journey before we were even presented with the project. They captured up until I think they got to like Chile when their boat broke down and they had to pause the journey. So they docked in Chile, came back to the US, and started to look for raise funding again to try to complete their journey. And in that time, which was like I think a 6-month period before the next leg of their journey, we through a series of connections with the director, a family member of the writer, Stephen, was on the boat as well, knew the director, Glenn. It was just a series of crazy connections that the project came to us, and they said, hey, we captured all this footage. You guys are professionals. Can you tell us if you think we have something here? We would love to make this into like a real film. And I sorted through the footage just for a few days, just to kind of give Glenn, the director, my feedback as far as like if I think this is a possibility. And it was an overwhelming, hell yes for me, because I mean the the footage was just gorgeous. I mean, on its own, it was just a beautiful film to capture. And then the heart of the story, which is uh, veteran PTSD and mental health struggles, that really connected with me too. And I never served in the military, but I think we all know people that have various mental health struggles in our life. Family members, friends, loved ones. So that really resonated with me, and just the desire to learn more about the culture of a culture that I knew not much about, which is veterans and their struggles, their experience coming home from serving.
What strikes me is that, and I said before that these three had no film experience, but just the aesthetics of and the imagery that they caught. I mean, sometimes you set out to capture a scene or an image, and it becomes a disaster because of not being prepared, or the weather doesn't cooperate. But I mean, and I'm sure there were things that sort of worked against them on this voyage. But I mean, just talking, and looking at the images of these guys on this boat and what they went through. I mean, luck was definitely on their side. I mean, it seems to me like, even seasoned professionals might not even be able to capture some of the imagery that these guys, complete novices, were able to capture by themselves.
Yeah. I mean, my hat's off to them for really taking it seriously. And, they raised some money to invest in some decent, cameras, and, did a lot of YouTube research as far as, documentary filmmaking. And I mean, what you saw, Paul, was a very tiny fraction of what came back. I mean, we had definitely over 100 hours worth of footage. So, a lot of it was what you would expect from, amateur filmmakers who had never done it before. But they had plenty of gold in there too that we had to pare down to what's in the 80-minute movie. And then you saw the best of the best in the trailer.
Yeah. I guess that's where the work of a great editor comes into play, because, as you said, you have all of this content that you have to whittle down to 80 or 90 minutes. And what is that process like? Because I always find myself like wishing I had a few extra minutes to put something in, or gee, I really don't want to edit this out, but I really want to put it in, but it doesn't. So how do you balance the desire to get it right with the desire to want to put more in, with sometimes the consequences of having to take stuff out? How do you balance that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, we always, when I say we, it's because editing is a very collaborative process. Usually the filmmaking team, definitely the director, sometimes the producer, depending on how involved the producer is in that process. We always map out what the story is before, like, the old fashioned way, like with Post-it notes on a whiteboard. And, because just the tactile nature of actually just picking up a Post-it and moving it around, it's just a quick way to brainstorm some thoughts as far as like structure and what's important and what's not important. And once we have that sort of like basic roadmap laid out, then we kind of have a path to go down. And once you're on that path, some footage is just irrelevant because it's not part of the story. Even if it's good footage on its own, you have to learn to not be tempted by some shiny things that might look good on their own because they don't service the greater story. So that's kind of the start. And then cuts are always long. We always start out with a much longer cut. I don't remember what our first one was. I'm sure it was well over 2 hours.
Sure.
And then you start, just refining, and it's an iterative process. Hopefully you share with some trusted people who have constructive notes, and then you start whittling away until you get to the final version.
When when students watch this interview and they sort of become intrigued by your work. What type of advice, Vic, can you offer them? Because look, nothing in life is easy, and it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of time and effort, and you really have to invest in many cases, every last ounce of energy that you have to get where you want to be, and then to, work on whatever project it is that you're working on. So, what type of advice can you offer students who would like to follow in your footsteps as an editor, or to work in this industry in some way or form?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, there's the obvious things where you have to work hard and follow your passion, whatever, whether it's editing or any of the aspect of production. Uh, but as far as having the sort of putting yourself in a position to, have an opportunity to work on projects that you might be passionate about, I would say relationships play a big part in that. And what I mean is, you never know when meeting someone, that could just be a happenstance, could turn into, a connection that could turn into a project that you might want to work on. I think that's played a big part in. I worked, on staff at a couple of companies, but I've been freelance the past 5 or 6 years, and I think the way I'm able to sustain that is the relationships that I've built over the years. You just never know. I've had projects come to me through relationships that, I made maybe 10 years ago that seemed inconsequential at the time, just in passing, at an event, or like at a production event, or somebody was in the room while I was working on a project that they had nothing to do with. And then it, connections happened, and all of a sudden I'm presented with a project. So I find that, just you never know who you're going to meet that might turn into something that you might be interested in being a part of. So, I mean, a good example is when I was working in New York. I guess it was 5, 6 years ago. I was working at a post-production company, doing mostly commercial work, and I happened to meet a director who was there working on a different project with a different editor. I just met him, in the kitchen over coffee. And we started chatting, and it turned out he was from the Philadelphia area, and so we had that connection. Didn't even remember his name. And I ended up moving back to Philadelphia and remembering, I was like, that director was a really nice guy. And I wish I would have gotten his information. And I emailed the editor who he was working with that day. I was like, hey, could you tell me the name of that director? And we eventually connected, had a coffee, and I didn't talk to him for another few years after that, because he didn't have a project for me. And now I've been working with him on, this is my second film. I'm currently working on a second film with him right now. And pretty much throughout the pandemic, I've worked with him, pretty much throughout the entire pandemic. So I never would have guessed that happened, happenstance. Coffee in the kitchen would turn into, working on two really interesting films, 5, 6 years later.
Sure. We have just about 3 minutes left here, but I have to ask the question: when you sit back and you put that finishing touch on that project, and whether it's for television or if it's on the big screen, Dick, when you sit back and look at that project on the screen, whether it's a small screen or a large screen, what goes through your mind? I mean, what's that? It's got to be kind of surreal that you sit there and say, I had something to do with that. I put all the pieces of that puzzle together. What's that like for you?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly satisfying. That is a, you feel your work coming to life on the big screen, but what's even more so is working on projects when the subject material, similarly to Hell or High Seas, touches people, and they tell you how much a project meant to them. That to me is the ultimate satisfaction. It's great seeing it all together, but we do it to connect with people. Filmmaking is storytelling. It's a form of communication. So when people connect with a project, and I find out that it just, they felt something watching it. That's the best feeling for me.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your latest project, Hell or High Seas, and all of your work. And I know that you are, as I said, just based on some of your demo reel, some of these projects that you've worked on are brilliant. And I want to hats off to you for a job well done, and I look forward to what might come down the road next for you. So, Vic, first of all, I want to thank you for participating on this program, because I know you're very, very busy, but allowing us some time to talk about your career and about your projects. And again, all the best to you. And hopefully in the future we can reconnect and talk about your latest projects.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. That was very kind of you to say. And thank you for inviting me on this program. This was a lot of fun.
Well, again, Vic Carreno is our guest, and you could go to his website if you want to learn more about him, which is viccarreno.com. And we'll have the address on the screen where you could go and find out more about him. And I want to thank him again for his time. Until the next time, my name is Paul Perrello. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us here on the Philly Factor.